now, I would like to introduce our Trask Award this year. The Society is pleased to award the 2022 Trask Award to Edward C. Keefer in recognition of his distinguished career in federal history and decades of service to the profession. A longtime member of SHFG, Keefer has worked tirelessly to document the history of U.S. foreign relations and national security policy, both the Department of State and the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Along the way, he has mentored generations of historians and imparted to them his passion for doing historical work in the public interest. Ted Keefer retired in 2008 as the general editor of the Department of State's documentary series, Foreign Relations of the United States. In 2009, he joined the Historical Office of the Secretary of Defense as a contract historian. During his 34 years at State, he edited or co-edited 25 Fruits Valley volumes. His volume on Indonesia, 1964 to 1968, was translated into Indonesian and became an academic bestseller. At the Pentagon, he researched and wrote Harold Brown, Offsetting the Soviet Military Challenge, 1977 through 1981, published in 2017 as part of the Department of Defense's Secretary of Defense Historical Series. The second authorized history series, Caspar Weinberger and the Military Buildup, 1981 through 1985, is forthcoming. He's currently researching a third volume on Dick Cheney's tenure as Secretary of Defense. Please join me in welcoming Edward Keefer. Has to be good pictures.
I'd like to thank the Society of History and the federal government for honoring me with the Roger Trask Award. When I was nominated, I naturally reflected on my career. What was it that distinguished me? I spent 34 years as a researcher, editor, and general editor of the Foreign Relations series, and 14 years at the Office of the Secretary of Defense, writing histories of individual secretaries. Then it dawned on me, I won this prize for longevity. I must have learned something in that half century. My career has been to document and explain U.S. national security and foreign policy. It's what I know, and it's what I'm going to talk about today. I first want to talk about what I think federal historians provide to the American people at its most basic level. Most obviously, we offer transparency and accountability, which are two pillars of democracy. We document and explain what federal government officials have done in the name of the American people and with taxpayer money. Now, of course, transparency has been the hallmark of the Foreign Relations series since its inception in 1861. Since 1992, the Department of State is legally required to provide the public a true and accurate record of foreign policy and relations and decisions. Now, this has not always been easy. During my time at State, the Fruits series faced a crisis when it failed to account for covert actions in foreign relations. After hard negotiations, representatives of CIA, the NSC staff, and state historians worked out a system to release significant information about covert operations and documents about covert operations, in fact, without releasing still classified sources and methods. It's not perfect, but it's virtually the only operation of its kind in the world. Now, other challenges face the Foreign Relations series. The proliferation of players in the national security process required us to do research at multiple agencies, and cost was always a factor. Hiring 40 historians or so to produce 35 to 45 volumes for each presidential administration is a substantial investment. And I need to remind you that in hard times, the BDIs of budget cutters are drawn to historical programs. not so much for the money that their demise will save, but because they don't understand the value of history. And these bureaucrats fail to recognize the value of transparency and accountability. And one of the difficult challenges facing the Fruce series when I was there was integrating the Nixon tapes into the series. The huge number of Oval Office conversations were of poor quality. They were without attribution, and they ranged over a dizzying array of topics. We tried to locate the relevant tapes and transcribe them ourselves, but we found out it was impossible. The State Department then hired transcribers who worked with the National Archives. The more they did, the better they got, but it was still a monumental job. The tapes added enormously to the documentary record, although they were not without controversy. The Fruce volume on South Asia 1971 reproduced some very uncomplimentary remarks by Nixon and Kissinger about Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Its publication occasioned a raft of media comment, temporary anguish at the embassy in New Delhi, and more downloads of the volume, mostly in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, than any other one, with a possible exception of the Cuban Missile Crisis. I got some personal blowback from this volume. Henry Kissinger complained to me that what Oval Office chit-chat, what he called the tapes, had no place in the Fruce series. I mumbled something about providing the entire record, but I did not convince Dr. K. Now, this crucial mission of shedding light on the federal government's workings, warts and all, is important. And I think it's true of almost all federal historical publications and programs, whether explaining the partial core meltdown at 3 Mile Island, documenting the attack on the Pentagon in 9/11, or Pat Harahan's wonderful work on nuclear force reduction. I think we as historians provide a real service. We do interviews, we do hard research in federal records, and we use all the tools of scholarship, and we don't pull our punches. The result is evidence-based history with well-reasoned conclusions. Now, our work is always available online without copyright, and it has a multiplier effect as it reverberates in the fields of academic and popular history. We federal historians plant the seeds, till the soil, harvest the crops, and then give away the bounty of our work. In addition, federal historians play an important role in the declassification process. We don't have a declassification authority, but our publications such as Fruce, the Department of Defense Historical Series, or the History of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, use classified material. And by doing so, they push the envelope declassification. They identify and submit for declassification key documents. In effect, they're the first advocates for release of documentation. While the process can be long and often agonizing, the success rate is relatively good. Our declassified historical products are opening for further historical research. Now, there's another major role that public historians that I've experienced in my career. And academic historians have long claimed that if decision and policymakers had proper historical context, they might make better choices. Here's obviously potential fertile ground for federal historians. During my time at State, our record was mixed. I was involved in many rush projects to provide historical background and context. We hope to inform, if not influence, policy decisions. The researchers tasked the historian at State with providing historical background. The request often sought to justify a decision already taken or about to be taken, or to confirm a conviction already held. One example will suffice, I think. After the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, the George W. Bush administration debated how best to transition from an occupation of Iraq to a civilian Iraqi government. Secretary of State Colin Powell asked for a rush study of previous occupation administrations of defeated powers and what made them successful. We looked at the post-World War II occupations of Japan, Germany, South Korea, and the UN occupation of Cambodia, and some basic facts emerged. These successful occupations were often long, taking many years. They also benefited from the existence of previous figurehead leaders around whom the people could rally. In Japan, it was the emperor. In Cambodia, Prince Sihanouk. Furthermore, in Germany and Japan, the defeated military forces initially played a role in keeping and maintaining civil society and keeping order. We informed Powell of our conclusions and suggested that the occupation of Iraq would require a US-led government that would oversee the transition to Iraqi government over a period of years. Our study matched the views of Powell and his advisors, although we did not know that at the time. But our advice clashed with Secretary Don Rumsfeld's insistence on putting an Iraqi face on post-war Iraq as soon as possible. And by an Iraqi face, I think Rumsfeld meant Iraqis closely associated with the Pentagon or with Washington. Powell sent our memo to Rumsfeld. He dismissed it with sarcasm. As he recalled in his memoirs, and I quote, Powell sent a memo from the State Department historian labeled informative. The paper argued that any occupation would take time. That was apparently Colin Powell's position on the matter. Also in his memoirs, Rumsfeld maintained that a better model for Iraq was the decision in 1945 not to occupy liberated France because it was rallying around de Gaulle. Now, equating Iraq with a France, to me, is a really bad historical analogy. Of course, the Bush administration opted for a brief interim US occupation under Paul Bremer, and the Bremer administration is generally considered to have made virtually every wrong decision it could make. And the result was many years of hard fighting by our military forces in Iraq to achieve even a semblance of the Iraqi government that Rumsfeld had envisioned. Now, I don't suggest that this example indicates that government officials do not appreciate and use historical background. Many of you in the audience no doubt can recall when policymakers have benefited from historical context provided by your agency historians. In my experience, speechwriters at State, Defense, and the White House regularly request historical context for speeches, which often commemorate important historical events. The requesters rely on the historical offices to provide an accurate raw material and historical background. President Bill Clinton's 4 speeches on the beaches and the cemeteries at Normandy on the 50th anniversary of D-Day cited personal accounts of those who took part in the invasion. The historical offices of state and the uniformed military services produced accounts based on letters written home from service members about to hit the beaches. Clinton's speechwriters weaved them into his speeches almost word for word, and the result was a heartfelt presidential celebration of a monumental event. Now, historical offices and federal historians also provide useful information to the public. The histories of US past conflicts written by federal military historians recognize and honor those who served. I'm reminded of the Department of Defense's honor bound a searing personal account of the POW experience in North Vietnam and Southeast Asia, which was reprinted by the Naval Institute Press and nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Publications and papers by federal historians not only commemorate, they educate by explaining the role that the federal agencies have played in the development of US political, governmental, environmental history. They also provide federal workers the opportunity to learn more about the history and mission of their own agencies. As I said at the beginning of my talk, my experience has been limited to state and defense. The rest of the public history profession I know only by its sterling reputation. I wish to acknowledge the work of federal historians, archivists, curators, librarians, and other practitioners of public history. They have made lasting contributions to the country and its citizens. I would like to add as a parting observation that the old days of academic historians, belittling government historians are long over. Some of today's best historians work for the federal government. They relish the opportunity to undertake research in federal records. They have the opportunity, they have the access, and they have the time to do the job properly. Their research, writing, and conclusions compare favorably with any history produced today. And furthermore, as academic jobs in history become fewer, federal and public history programs continue to offer promising non-teaching careers. Let me say in conclusion that my work has been challenging and rewarding. I have been proud to have been a federal and public historian for 48 years. And on behalf of all members of the SHFG community, I gratefully accept this award.